Hello, and welcome to the webinar, Building a Business Case for Skills Transformation. My name is Eric Wallace with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have a few administrative details to share with you, and then we'll begin our discussion. First, we'd like to thank Beamery for their partnership with today's event. They've been wonderful partners to Argyle, and they're committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. Thank you again to Beamery. We appreciate you joining us today. We welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. For those of you who are active on social media, please use the hashtag ArgyleDigital and follow us at Argyle Exec Forum. Also be sure to follow Argyle on LinkedIn for special announcements. I also wanted to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. We've worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, we want to hear from you, so please submit all questions that come up during today's event into the chat section of the interface. Following the discussion, we've set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on your questions. Let's begin by setting the stage a little bit, and then we'll have our speakers introduce themselves. Businesses are really struggling now with figuring out where to go with the talent that they have and how to acquire the talent that they need. 61% of employees feel that their full set of skills are not being utilized in their current workplace. 87% of companies worldwide report experiencing skills gaps today or expect to have skills gaps over the next 5 years. Just by closing those current skills gaps, the global economy would gain at least $6.5 trillion in gains by 2030 through increased productivity. Throughout this discussion, we'll cover why this shift is so important, the key steps to such an approach, considerations to take into account on the organizational impact, and most importantly, success stories and examples to take away with you. Let's have our speakers introduce themselves now. Matt, can we start with you, please?
Sure. Thanks, Eric. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Fenton. I join you from New York, and I am Vice President and Head of Advisory at Beamery. Beamery's advisory team is fairly new. It started about 10 months ago, and the idea being that we could connect the world of technology with a world of subject matter experts and frankly, a series of former consultants in a way that increases the ability of our clients and organizations to maximize the value of Beamery as a platform. Prior to Beamery, I spent 5 years at McKinsey, where I really sat at the intersection of talent and analytics. So part and parcel of the conversation that we'll be having today. There, I led the talent acquisition service line and was one of our global leaders of people analytics. So I've been living in this space for a while now and excited to dig in with you all. So thanks for joining today and looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Matt. David, can you please introduce yourself?
Yep, thanks, Eric, and thanks, Matt. Glad to be here with everyone today. My name is David Swans. I'm a partner in IBM Consulting's talent transformation practice, which covers the spectrum of technology, data, automation, and services. And every day I have a whole history of working with clients and internally within IBM around the topics of talent acquisition, talent development, HR operations, and excited to share with you some insights today on what we've seen in the market and what we've experienced at IBM as we talk about the skills transformation topic. Thanks for having me today.
Great, thank you, David. Let's begin our discussion. So the first question is, why are we seeing this shift towards skills-based transformation? Matt, can we start with you and then we'll continue with David?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you've got a number of great drivers on the screen here. I think, organizations which historically have been used to this growth mode have really woken up to the reality that markets aren't solely moving up and to the right. That coupled with interest rates that do not stay at a near zero clip mean that organizations have been caused to rethink how they use talent and apply talent most effectively in their organizations. So as a result of this, we're seeing organizations that have demanded greater efficiency and effectiveness from all parts of the business. This has given rise to, in this case, or perhaps sheds a light on different ways of thinking and operating. And so beyond some of these kind of macroeconomic factors and cost pressures and aspects of skills data that you're seeing here, I think there are a couple of other elements or emerging trends that I would kind of cite here. I think number one is new and improved technological solutions. So from usage of external data to inform trending and benchmarking to large language models and everyone's new best friend, which is ChatGPT or some version thereof, we're seeing technology increasingly be a part of our everyday lives. And that means it's being infused into the way that we think about talent and make talent-related decisions. The second thing is really around evolving flexible work environments and models. I think, for better or for worse, we still largely live in a remote environment, which has required evolution in the ways of working to support large and often geographically diverse teams. I can say that with a straight face, sitting in New York and working remotely now, where my team is actually located throughout the United States, but there isn't anyone else on my team that's based in New York. And so with that, and with this kind of dynamic nature of these teams, requires greater adaptability and openness to continuing, to continuous learning and development. And so a lot of that, again, we're thinking through how do we optimize skills and how do we enhance these skills. So I think that, certainly the working environments play a role. And a third is around, frankly, emphasis on improvement of diversity and inclusion outcomes. I think organizations have come to the realization, and some faster than others, that traditional hiring practices are often rife with biases, and traditional approaches which look at role, title, and look at educational background, which I think we'll hit on a bit later, maybe aren't the right path or aren't necessarily perfect for hiring the best talent. So a skills-based approach can help to mitigate some of these challenges by focusing on skills required for that role, which creates a more inclusive workforce, but also helps cultivate, more diverse set of skills and perspectives. So that perhaps is a little bit of a preamble. David, I don't know if there's anything you add to that as well.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit of perspective. IBM's been on a skills transformation, started over a decade ago, and really boils down to its simplicity here at IBM. But we typically see it in the technology fields and obviously in probably more clinical fields where the talent we need tomorrow does not exist today. And how do you really bring in and attract the right type of talent for what you need and go on a journey? So there's a couple of different fields within IBM where that clicks and makes a lot of sense. In particular, security, cloud, and quantum computing in particular are three areas where the talent either doesn't exist and you really need to bring in certain types of individuals with certain skill sets to be able to achieve what you're trying to achieve in terms of bringing a lot of the research and development that we have into life in terms of what's next and what we're thinking about and introducing into the marketplace overall. So we look at it as a mechanism of bringing the right people in with certain attributes, i.e. skills, and then how do we upskill them and reskill them to keep them on that particular journey over time. What we've also found too, taking the concept of security, that essentially if we go out and find those, try and find those people with years of experience, et cetera, that, it's harder to find. Number one, it takes longer to find. And we found that actually, if we just find the right people with the right types of skills, which might not actually be with what you think, it's actually in our case more in the context of adjacent skills, we can train them up and keep them longer, essentially is the punchline, and put them on a journey if we find the right types of people. And we see that over and over and over again being copied, and we're happy if it's being copied. A friend of mine, for example, his son was hardly even a graduate of high school and decided to get into some program like this, not at IBM, but at Cal, and now he's an ethical hacker, right? So he's leaning into some sense of a skill set that he has and what he loves to do and have that connection between love and work, and apply those skills to something that's really important in today's technological field is how do I protect what I have? Because it's a valuable asset. And if I get hacked or something gets stolen or I have to pay a ransom, it affects my brand and my ability to attract and keep new customers. So it also really is for us about how do we make better decisions about buy, build, borrow, bounce, the B's in talent acquisition and talent management. Once you understand and have line of sight to what your business needs and what you actually have in terms of bench strength, you can start to make better decisions as an organization as to where you deploy people, how you deploy them, when you acquire them, et cetera, that this can actually have a real ROI and speed the value for your organization as well. So that's what's extremely important to us and what we talk to clients about every day.
Great, thank you. Let's continue with our first poll. Polls will be on the right-hand side of the screen, right next to chat. And the poll is, how ready are you to become a skills-based organization? So let's give everyone a real short time to answer that. We have about the majority, well, a small majority is saying, I don't know where to start. Although now that's running neck and neck with I'm behind on becoming skills-based. So let's continue with our next question, and that is, what do we mean when we say skills-based transformation? David, can you please take the lead on this one, please?
Sure. So skills-based transformation is for us a little bit of a focus in probably about 6 key different areas, and it could be more depending on the organization, but it's the strategy. What is your strategy as an organization? What are those skill sets that are very important and mission critical to your organization? And then also, what are those potential future skills or gaps that you have line of sight to as well, that all play into that strategy of how you want to attract, engage, et cetera. For us as well, it's also looking at our structure, our systems, our leaders, and our culture, and making sure that essentially we look at skills as a golden thread. So in talent acquisition, it's about how we attract and engage and leverage skills, not job titles. In talent development, it's how do we understand our bench strength, but also put people on a career journey to let them lean into what they want to learn, where they want to learn it, how they want to consume the information, and get badged or credentialed essentially in some of those areas. So the organization then understands somebody's actually achieved something new, and we can leverage that skill set to redeploy them into something else. We also believe from a cultural perspective, it's a retention strategy as well. We find that as people, not only can it help with attraction and engagement, but as people are learning and consuming more, we actually see those are actually by coincidence and or not, the most engaged employees in the organization as well. And then ultimately, we see that as a strategy that helps us deploy and serve so that we can understand, like I mentioned earlier, a little bit from a workforce management planning perspective of who's got the particular type of skill sets that we need and where the organization needs those skills so that we can internally move people and put them on a career trajectory that serves the organization and serves the employee itself, because they're leaning more into the organization is recognizing me for me and what I've learned, consumed, and what I've contributed back.
Matt, what do you think?
I love it. I think, from a skills first approach, I think there are kind of 2 ways to interpret the question. There's one that is, what does it mean to be skills first? And I think, David nailed this in terms of how do you think about skills over degrees, skills over job titles. And so, aspects of a candidate in relation to degrees and job titles don't necessarily dictate whether or not he or she is the right person for the job. But I think in terms of our core beliefs, if I were to kind of reiterate or define what are the 2 or 3 things that we think about, I think they very much fall in line with what David was sharing. I think the first is around what I would say is applying systems thinking. So this means working cross-functionally across an organization, considering all stages of the employee lifecycle to capture really the full value of transforming a talent system. So, David, and what you're sharing, to me, this is like the strategy, this is the structure and systems in place. The second thing that needs to be in place as you think about an organization and being successful and taking this kind of skills-based approach is establishing an ownership mindset within the organization. And so to me, this is defining the culture, the ways of working, but also holding employees accountable. This is building capabilities. This is, reinforcing the right mindsets and helping embed change within the organization. So very much bringing the organization along and promoting engagement kind of across the journey, which again is something if you're an organization today that's considering this journey. And as I look at the poll and seeing, many people are stuck, they don't know where to start or they're behind. Part of it is defining that path forward and how to make it a success, I think there it's important to consider the implications on culture, the implications on engagement and retention, before pursuing this effort. And then the last, and I'd be remiss without mentioning this, at least at Beamery, how we think about skills-based transformation, and a key enabler to that is embracing digital and analytics. I think, given the immense value at stake represented by getting talent right, and manage, and frankly, to do this, you need to manage the recruiting process the way you would any other part of the business. And to us, that means with data. And so that will help us move past gut feelings and intuition to understand what really matters. And you'll see this manifesting in terms of, I think, David, you alluded to understanding, who has skills, where can we move people internally? There's a tremendous opportunity to harness the power of data and analytics to do that more effectively, to do that not necessarily based on your social networks that are embedded within your organization, but rather to consider how might we use data to our advantage, and some of the kind of skill adjacency we talked about a little bit earlier, to our advantage, to understand who might be a good fit, who today is somebody that might have some coding background and an interest in being kind of socially responsible, and become that hacker for good, right? So I think that there are numerous examples of that, where I think skills-based hiring can make a meaningful difference. I'll share one example of this kind of coming to life, and where I see the difference in kind of traditional hiring versus the skills-based lens. And this is actually, it's a friend of mine, who years ago, and when I say years, I mean like in middle school and high school, this person was a class clown, just a very funny person, a very engaging person, but didn't always take school as seriously as he should have. And when his friends were graduating, he decided he didn't want to go to college and follow the kind of a similar track. And instead he got a job in a factory. And he realized pretty quickly that it wasn't the right fit for him, that physical labor, working on a line, was just not something that he wanted to spend the rest of his life doing. And so he was thinking, how can I change this? And ultimately, and credit to him, he determined that he'd go back to school. He became a teacher, and he learned, interpersonal skills, building relationships was certainly something that he had a strength at. And that was something that perhaps was evidenced by some of, his early life, and being a class clown, being that person that enjoyed, being this kind of center of attention, but also engaging others. And he moved from that role into a sales position, working at a call center. And so his career evolved, and it was during the time at that call center that somebody saw some talent. They saw an opportunity in this individual. They saw some capability, and they took this person, his name's Jason, under his wing, and helped build him into what he is today. And ultimately, he learned after so many years, and this is the story that I'm telling is quite literally over decades. He ultimately learned that sales is where he wanted to be. And today he actually is a colleague of mine who shared that story. So I am borrowing the story in effect from him, but for the purposes of this conversation, it really highlights or illustrates that traditional hiring means have resulted in Jason moving from role to role, right? That it took him a while, it took him 20, 30 years before he realized, hey, this is the path that I'm highly successful at and the right one for me. Skills-based hiring aims to get at that much more quickly, to figure out what are the core skills that you have, and then connecting you with opportunities that set you up for success, and to do that much more efficiently. So I think just another example, in addition to the one that David shared on kind of the white hat, where skills-based hiring has made a meaningful difference, and want to apply that more consistently across the way that organizations are hiring today.
Thank you. So what do we mean when we say the word skill anyway? Matt, can you shed some light on that, and then we'll have David go?
Yeah, sure. I think we've been using skill adjacency. So I think the quick overview is that, skills, in my opinion, are the atomic units that make up an individual candidate or employee. They take a number of forms, and you've probably heard of these. So there are, hard skills, which are like specific teachable abilities that are more quantifiable. So this is like programming or data analysis. Soft skills, which are often thought of as interpersonal or people skills. This is thinking about how you interact. So things like leadership, teamwork. And then another is transferable skills. So skills that can be applied across multiple roles and industries. Critical thinking is the one that comes to mind there. Adjacent skills is a way of thinking about what are some complementary skills or abilities that are closely related to those which you have today. So they're particularly important as it relates to looking at a candidate or employee's level of fit for a given role, and potentially transitioning. So when you think about mobility, this comes into play. And I'll give you a quick example of this where it was successful. Was a client that I was working with was in the technology space, specifically video game manufacturing. And what they found was that they had this gap in designers, right? They needed more designers to scale the pace at which they were developing games. And traditional approach to hiring these video game designers required that they have video games designing skills or experience before getting the role. And you can imagine, as a result, it makes it exceedingly difficult to land a role in an organization or to find this talent, because it really requires a leap of faith. For you to get a role in video game design, you need to have had that in the past. And so it's this vicious cycle of, for you to break in, you really need something special to happen to you. And so this particular organization said, you know what, instead of tackling this with money or dollars, because that talent is expensive, it's a niche skill, there's a finite number of individuals that fit that, they said, how can we use adjacency? And instead of looking for this talent that's already a video game designer, how can we find talent with adjacent skills that could be upskilled into that role? And so what they did was really apply the skills-based lens to what otherwise was a very expensive problem. And as a result, they had quite a large cadre of individuals that they identified that had a number of the adjacent skills. So let's say, programming, or they had experience with, user experience design that could be trained to be graphic designers, and so on and so forth. And when they went through this program, developed it and scaled it up, what they found was that not only did it save them a bunch of money, but it also had tremendous implications on retention of talent, on diversity of talent, and so on. So, what started as an age-old problem, all right, we need to hire, and let's hire for a particular role. By taking a skills-based approach and thinking about adjacency, they were actually able to find a somewhat novel solution to something that they're now looking at applying in other areas of the organization.
David, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, and that's a great example, Matt. And this is also some of the intersection of where we've seen the leveraging data, AI, et cetera, to complement what we need, right? As humans, we can't be all things to all people and understand nuances in any particular roles. And so, just dovetailing a little bit of what Matt said, for us and what we've seen at clients as well, and there was a stat that was previously up there, about 88% of skilled talent gets overlooked within an organization's ATS, for example, I believe was the statistic. And, we're almost victims of our own technologies that we've put into place, right? And usually what we see when we peel back the onion is job descriptions that have been painted over decades that lead to some of those bad behaviors in talent acquisition, for example. So sometimes some of this is you have the tool sets in front of you. It's really understanding the strengths and weaknesses and some of the historical attributes of what actually went into these systems, and doing a little bit of hygiene in there so that you can understand some things. But for us, this is also where we leverage AI. So a good example of this is if somebody applies, we have a role maybe looking for somebody with Hadoop experience, and somebody has on a resume, I have DBase. Most systems would not really pick that up. They would look for an exact match. We're leveraging AI to say, no, DBase is a foundational language for Hadoop. This person has all the other attributes. So, it's not necessarily up to the recruiter or the human to actually understand all these complexities across multiple types of job roles, as much as to empower or provide jet fuel to help understand that there's a wealth of people that fit different types of job profiles that you're trying to fill. And again, it's not on position or degree, it's more based on the skills. So you're likely to get more rich results, get better time to fill, faster business results, speed to revenue, because you're getting the people that you need within that organization to fulfill the business requirements that they're trying to solve for at any given time.
Great, thank you. Let's continue. So our next question is, where do we start? What are the key steps and conditions that need to be in place to guarantee success? David, let's start with you and then continue with Matt, please.
Yeah, and I can say it's super hard to get started. Our previous CHRO that started IBM on this journey and made this a very profound part of IBM's HR strategy overall, where skills is the golden thread. It's super hard. She equally would describe it as a flywheel, though, because once you got started, it really built momentum. So there's a couple of key things. And I just mentioned one a little bit earlier is really understand the strengths and weaknesses of your systems and really understand your data overall that you have. Many organizations have a wealth of data, and it sometimes doesn't even sit within HR too. A really good example of that is we're helping a large organization right now on how do we make better buy, build, borrow decisions. They have a little bit of a maturity curve where they've actually built the skills frameworks and taxonomy that they wanted, but we're leveraging the technology to help complement some of the effort that actually has to do it. And what's super interesting about it is the amount of data that we're actually going to be able to consume in all of this is not just in HR. It actually reaches across and taps into their Salesforce system, for example, their financial system, so that the organization can actually make better decisions, both from a financial perspective, but also know what's going on from the perspective of their sales pipeline. So they know if they have to hire, hold, maybe stop, these are different types of decisions that really enable or help them to be able to do some of those things that I described. But to get started, to get to that point, I really start with making sure your organization, at least in HR, is very succinct in terms of what I described of start with marrying up your talent development and talent acquisition departments in terms of a cohesive understanding of job profiles, skills that are needed. They're using common nomenclature so that you're hiring the people and then you're retaining them based on the same set of data and standards. And then once they get there, you understand what skills people have and then what skills they're going to need to be successful throughout their career trajectory. This is where that interplay and link between all your silos within HR need to have one single comprehensive strategy overall. So between understanding your data and marrying up the silos, that's the great place to start. Matt, I don't know if you have a different opinion or want to add on to that as well.
Yeah, I think it's actually a great segue because I think, as it relates to figuring out where to start, I mean, obviously that's going to be the hardest part is actually taking on that inertia and moving, or at least starting the movement in your organization. And I think the first place that I often recommend our clients start is around looking at sort of the data front that you just alluded to, which is really around establishing this common framework for describing and relating roles. So basically, in short, defining your skills language. And, we see skills as the backbone, but unfortunately skills data is often out of date, it's inconsistent, and almost always it's not unified into a single source of truth. It's split across many different discrete systems. And the way I explain this is often if you think about you're sitting in a room with, let's say there's 10 individuals in a room, each of whom speak a different language, and you're not able to use your hands. It's just audio. And trying to explain what your skills are to those individuals who only speak one language and often not your language. That's a little bit what it's like for your tech stack, right? Where you have, yes, you're all speaking a language and that language is skills, but different, perhaps dialects, right? Where when I say mathematics, you say statistics, or you say multiplication, right? To make it, overly simplistic. So it's very hard to connect these. Now, fortunately, technology is able to act as a little bit of like a real-time Google Translate service. So, instead of being stuck in that room where you're only speaking a single language, you now have something that is actively translating as you're speaking and brings together that unified set of skills and really enables you to become omniscient, right? So this helps you do more of that dynamic workforce planning. It helps you, manage your job architecture. It helps you identify skills gap. And, fortunately, I think a combination of advances in technology, we're talking about large language models and just analytics in general, it's not a 20, 30, $40 million consulting spend effort. As a lifelong consultant, I've certainly seen those. But it's enhancing what already exists and providing a window into what happens today. And it's not years or months, but something that can be done within weeks. So that's one, is that common foundation for skills. I think once you have that, two other things that I think about. Number one is strengthening the connection between business and talent strategy. I think we call this workforce planning often, but in my opinion, this is really about using workforce intelligence to make better talent decisions by leveraging data to more effectively help plan and build your future workforce. It's also about moving away from spreadsheets and evolving our approach, right? Using real-time data, both internal and external labor market insights to drive, more effective decision making. So these help you make better, faster, hire better, and ultimately, retain talent longer. I think one of the challenges there is that we have this notion, or at least clients that I've worked with typically have this notion that workforce planning means that we need to identify gaps, understand how large is the gap, project that gap over multiple years, and then solve for this gap that may or may not happen 2, 3, 4 years down the line. I think it's just not the reality, and it's probably not where we should be emphasizing our efforts. Instead, let's shorten that time horizon and really think about what is business strategy, what are the key capabilities that we need to have in place, and do we have them over the next 6 to 12 months? And this is a place where technology is much more well positioned to make an informed decision, or at least help your talent teams make that informed decision. And then the last piece that I'll mention is just uniting mobility and learning to create more career flexibility. So today you'll hear talent mobility platforms. There are a variety of them, but I really think that that's a way of the future. And how do we mobilize talent through not just full-time opportunities? So I moved from my role today to another full-time role elsewhere in the organization, but there are alternatives around breaking down hard to find roles into gigs to build capabilities, about creating short-term rotational programs, or even developmental opportunities to build managerial experience, for instance, as well as mentorship, right? So each of these plays a role, and I think they kind of build on one another. Again, one being that talent framework, or that skills framework. The second being that connection between talent and strategy, and then the third being around mobilizing talent more effectively. You're giving me a little bit of PTSD, Matt, because and again, it's to acknowledge that the work is hard too, and understand that. But if you're prepared to dig in, it's an incredible journey that you can go on. One client we were working with in particular, 8 learning platforms with each of a different definition of a skill, right? And how do you harmonize that information and that data into what your organization is trying to accomplish and defines as a skill, is equally part of what we try and help with in the market as well, and equally something that the people in the audience probably need to think about as well, is each technology defines a skill differently, and how do you harmonize that across all of them? Absolutely.
So the next question is, it can be very difficult to get alignment from key stakeholders in this skills-based transformation journey. What advice do you have for the audience here? David, can we start with you, please?
Yeah, some simple advice, I think, just really falls within the normal realm of what you might see in any kind of change management that you would go through in any of your organization, whether you're putting in a new technology, a new strategy, get the right sponsorship, learn to fail and fail fast, find pockets of your areas where you have champions, start there, learn from that, and then grow, leverage data that then demonstrate, show, and sell back to the rest of the organization that this is a viable path. It's got better business results, and bring them along for the journey as well. It's the usual, yes, you can go big bang, but there's implications and potential side effects as a result of going that route, if you will. But those are some key areas that I would recommend anyone just explore. Partner, fail fast, get sponsorship, find the change champions within your organizations, try it there, learn from that, and leverage the data. Those are the key elements that I would talk to anyone about as they're learning or thinking about this as they go forward.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell that we think very similarly on this one. I think a lot of what you just shared, David, is very much in line with my own thoughts and what would be my own recommendations here. I think the perhaps adding two pieces which are largely embedded. I think one is just this idea that, you know, communicate clearly, early, and often, and that there's, I say this, some people will disagree, but that there's no such thing as over communication. I think one of the challenges is when particularly as it relates to an often remote environment or a hybrid environment where everyone's not seated in the same room or in the same building or even in the same city, is the need to communicate such that everyone has a common understanding of where we stand. So understanding, like, share the vision, the objectives, the timeline, the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. I think that's critically important. I think, David, you hit on the kind of identifying and prioritizing stakeholders, which is, another that I think about in terms of just stakeholder management being critically important to getting any effort off the line, or over the line, I guess I should say. And so determining who are the decision makers and overinvest time early in getting that buy-in. And to your point, it's about bringing those people along for the journey and failing fast where the effort dictates, right? So people love sharing their opinions and generally are conscious of change, hesitant to change. And so providing opportunities for engagement with key stakeholders and impacted individuals to generate greater buy-in, I think just further helps, get those fingerprints, you could say, of the organization on the change that you're trying to make, and also make people feel a part of it. And that way they're more likely to engage. And then maybe the last thing I would just add is connecting to impact. I think, David, you mentioned using data to help, deliver your story and your impact story. I think in today's environment, in particular, anything that has a price tag is scrutinized. And if it's not your procurement team, it's going to be the leadership team that's making the decision. And so really spending, this is an area that I've had my team, frankly, invest a lot of time, energy, and resources into, is helping organizations create that compelling business case that clearly connects the change that we're promoting or that we're suggesting or that we're looking to bring to life, and the value that it delivers, across a number of metrics that, are important to the organization, which certainly vary based on context. But I think that's a really important part here, in particular, if we're asking for investment of anything outside of time.
Yeah. One thing I'll add or just share a little bit, like in life inside IBM as well. It's anytime you come into IBM, or if you've been here for a while, you really feel and understand that learning is a real big key component of anything that we do here. We all have certain level of proficiency in the work that we do in the field that we operate within. But also, the other thing too is learning is a key critical aspect around that. Matt described a story of a individual that went from class clown to sales leader, for example, and it could be any particular story. Here we have 200,000 employees, and there's 200,000 stories just like that. And one of the things that we're good is once we have people here, we really want to keep them. So it's really understood that we have what we call a Think 40 requirement, that we have 40 hours of learning that we have to do, and it can be anything. Now, IBM equally provides the content for us to consume. So lately it's been relatively easy because all the topic is around Gen AI in particular, and we all want to make sure we're proficient and can talk to anyone about the topic of Gen AI. So the organization makes plenty of content available that's very easy to consume, and some highly technical depending on where you want to go with that. So I can make sure I have the bare minimum proficiency in AI so I can talk to anyone about it. But if I really want to get technical, I can go on a further journey and PhD level type of learning curriculum. The organization is capturing this data and understanding that and saying, well, this guy is very proficient in this area. It's relatively within HR. He's a consultant, so he understands these particular skill sets. But this is what he's engaged in and leaning into. as internal mobility opportunities open up, maybe we can consider him for over there because he possesses a certain amount of skill sets. He understands the organization and the culture, and then we can drive him towards those particular areas. If that's of interest to him, which it seems like it is, because that's what he's consuming the most of in terms of the learning curriculum.
Great, thank you. Let's change the channel a little bit and ask, what does this transformation look like from the perspective of organizational culture? Matt, can we start with you, please?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, culture is something that we would be remiss not to mention here as it relates to any sort of transformation, right? Skills-based transformation or otherwise. And I think, as I said before, I think humans, typically do not like to change. And to address this, building buy-in early by involving employees often, and some of the keys that David just alluded to, I think are critical to having a successful rollout. But when I think about culture specifically, I think about the mindsets and behaviors in an organization. And for us to be successful, or for organizations, I should say, to be successful, I typically break down culture and change, kind of this balance, into 4 components. And I will fully admit that I steal this framing from my prior life at McKinsey, where there's something called the influence model, which I think is just a really good way of structuring and thinking about how to make sure that your kind of change management and culture are hand in hand as it relates to any major change effort or any major transformation. So I'll provide the simple answer now, and I think there's plenty of literature online for you to learn a little bit more if it sounds interesting or applicable. I think so. Number 1 is role model the change. So this is all about reinforcing the importance of leaders, colleagues, and staff behaving in a different way, and it starts at the top, and nobody is excluded from changes in behaviors. So for skills-based organizations, this could be the way that you hire, the way that you talk about talent, the way that you think about talent metrics and performance of an organization. The second is around fostering understanding and conviction. This is about creating an understanding of what is being asked of the organization and to make it make sense. The simplest way for me to often do this, or one of the exercises that I would go through with clients is by developing a change story, right? So leading with both the heart and the mind. And change stories are often a way to think about the different sources of meaning, and connect to impact on society, on company, on team, on individual. Every individual has kind of different sources of meaning, but ultimately to create this storyline and cascade across the organization. So that's the second, understanding and conviction. The third is around developing skills and capabilities. And this is, are we equipping our teams with the ability to behave in this new way? And then the last is around reinforcement with formal mechanisms. So this is about ensuring that there's appropriate structures, processes, systems in place to enable the change. And so what I try to do is when I think about, culture, I think about these 4 buckets, and I think about the transformation that we're making and ensuring that each one is addressed. And there's some statistic that I won't be able to remember the exact number, but it's greater than 50% of organization, or greater than 50% uplift in organizations that are successful when they're able to apply each of these 4 kind of levers as it relates to any sort of transformation. So that's a bit of my mental model, but there are certainly others. And David, I'm curious to hear what IBM does and how they think about culture and as it relates to transformation.
Yeah, I think the easy answer is some of the key attributes where you see a high impact on the outcomes that you're seeking have to do with understanding your capacity of your people, your bench strength, your capabilities within your organization. I think having line of sight to that is something most organizations suffer from. And obviously it helps with retention and being people more engaged and contributing back to the organization. These are all positive net benefits that any organization receives. I think some of the underlying attributes that we see in particular too, I'll just give an example. We have a number of practice areas. So Oracle, SAP, Workday, for example, even practice areas for Microsoft or Salesforce, Adobe. And what's interesting is the skill sets amongst them, and particularly if you see like Oracle HCM or Workday HCM and SAP HCM, the skill sets are all the same. And I would say, skills-based transformations, most organizations like IBM would say, are you SAP certified? Great. You go in this group over here of SAP people. Are you Oracle certified? Great. Go in this group, et cetera. So the idea here is if you're a business analyst, for example, with an SAP certification, the skill sets that you need across Oracle and Workday it's the same. The only thing that you're missing is that certification really at the end of the day. So we're learning to leverage people a lot better across these different disciplines. So ultimately we save a ton of money. But the one thing I really see in particular that's happening is less clickiness and more teaminess, if you will, because people are reaching out to each other to engage resources that they need, particularly for their projects to make it successful in front of customers. And, they're looking at people more with that skill set that they have rather than this job title or certification. So it starts to become a little bit viral from that perspective as, resources are at a premium as the organization learns to leverage what they have rather than just continually externally trying to hire people, bring them in and make them more like us. We're learning to actually use what we have. And that definitely has a positive ROI for everyone because I can see how people are starting to learn and stretch themselves a little bit more of how do I bring in other people to help me solve the problems that I'm trying to solve for with my clients. And that's a very positive impact that I see, something that we're not necessarily measuring specifically, but can definitely see and feel as an outcome of all of this.
Let's continue with what does success look like in this transformation? David, can we start with you and then we'll continue with Matt?
Yeah, so I think ultimately it hits on some of the key things I just said. Sorry to get ahead of myself a little bit, but I think those are definitely positive attributes. But ultimately, you're going to see this in every single metric that you measure, whether it's talent acquisition or talent development. Right, faster time to hire, positive NPS scores for both candidates and hiring managers. Speed to value in terms of getting people productive at work faster. And then ultimately that's going to have a positive ROI. So from a leadership perspective, you're going to start seeing that on income statements, et cetera. That's going to keep CFOs, CEOs very happy and understanding that they have, the skills they need or when they need them a lot more enabled and quickly and effectively than they did previously. So there's a strong business case around all of it. One thing I'll add in terms of just tying it a little bit all together, where do we get started? What do we need? What does success look like? One of the things we also do here is we operate extremely transparently from HR back to the business. So everything we do, we publicly post metrics internally, of course, not publicly to the public, but internally, so all employees can see what's going on. A real good example, a little off topic, but a really good example of that is, we had a strategy, for example, in HR where we had 20 bots. Nobody knew which bot to go to for what. Do I go to the performance bot for this? Do I go to the compensation bot for that? We went to a bot of all bots strategy several years ago. But essentially, a majority of employee transactions go through an HR chat. That's where they all start from an employee experience perspective. And then, what we do is we publish the statistics back to the organization in terms of adoption, in terms of the types of transactions, feature releases, failures, et cetera. It's all there for everyone to see. And that's an important aspect as well to bring people along. to understand A, the importance of this, and B, rally people behind a singular cause of what the organization's trying to do as well.
Yeah, I
do you
think,
think?
success is going to vary based on organization, right? So it's hard for me to say that this is what success will be like for your organization. I think if I were to recommend a few considerations as you're building out what is that definition of success, I think number one is looking at metrics certainly is helpful. I think having something that's measurable, that's specific. So you can think about this generally in terms of efficiency or effectiveness. And some of the metrics that that David just alluded to, right? Things like whether it's time to hire, whether it's retention rate, whether it's the NPS scores, right? These are I guess you could argue the merits of scientific, but they're at least numerical in terms of understanding where are we today and where do we want to get to. And so I think generally when I work with organizations, the way that I think about it is what is it that you want to accomplish? Where is either the pain or what is the thing or what is the set of things that you want to get out of this change? And then how do we measure that appropriately? So if you want to become more efficient in your operations, if you want to drop OpEx, which frankly has probably been one of the more popular topics, the question is, how do we do things faster? How do we do the same with fewer resources, or do more with even fewer resources would be an even better outcome. And so we want to focus on specific levers that we can pull to do that. If you just want to get, if it's talent, sort of the talent outcomes of hiring better, retaining for longer, okay, that's great. But it's a different set of metrics that we want to look at and a different set of levers that we want to pull. So it's really up to you to first define what is your target or what is your ideal kind of future state, and then working backwards from there, how do we bring in metrics to evaluate our progress towards that. Now, I think that the last thing that I would say here is just that there's a way to think about this that is more implied benefits as well as direct cost reduction. And so there's kind of a balancing act, but between those two lenses. And then the thing that I would just leave you all with is, as you're thinking about defining your future state of success, and as you're thinking about the metrics involved, is don't forget to consider unintended consequences. And I was working with an organization that was looking to accelerate their processes, right? They wanted to hire faster, hire better, be more efficient. They wanted to do everything. And one of the things that they used to measure themselves was they used conversion rate, right? How many candidates make it from application to offer? And they wanted to increase that dramatically. And it sounds right. It sounds like, okay, well, fewer candidates, faster cycle time, great. Like, they're becoming more efficient. What resulted from that was that the pressure was being applied to recruiters. And so they became less specific or less discerning with the talent that make it into the organization. So the quality, something that they weren't thinking about, actually went down. So unintended consequences of metrics is just as important as actually thinking about the right metrics themselves. So maybe that is just a final thought.
But don't boil the ocean, fail fast, right?
Yeah.
And learn from that along the way and adapt. Yeah. So.
That I think that adage, that fail fast, is applicable across virtually any aspect of any transformation or frankly any strategic effort in your organizations.
Yep.
Continue with our second poll, which is going to be in the polls tab on the right-hand side of the screen. And the poll question is, do you think you can become a skills-based organization? We'll give people a couple of seconds to answer that, and then we'll continue with questions from the audience. So only one unlikely.
It's a good ratio so far.
So let's change the channel a little bit to questions from the audience. Just as a reminder, you can submit your questions in the chat section on the right-hand side of the screen. So the first question is, my question is related to the transformation from skills needs to headcount needs, as the position titles approach is more direct in terms of headcount. Who wants to take the first swing at that?
It's a good question. Can you repeat the question, I guess, is what I would
Sure,
ask.
the question,
noodle on
the question
that.
is, my question is related to the transformation from skills needs to headcount needs, and it says WFP in parentheses.
Yeah.
As the position titles approach is more direct in terms of headcount.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to start here, and then David, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. I think the shift to skills doesn't mean ignore titles entirely, and we just become the composition of our skills base. I don't think that that's going to help anyone, and it's exceedingly difficult for an organization to say, okay, I need, well, said differently, it'd be easier to say I need 50 software developers rather than I need 50 of a certain capability and trying to figure out where that lands within the organization. And so I think the question in essence is like, how do you strike that balance? And I think the point is you can still use the nomenclature of title. I don't think that that's going away. But in terms of figuring out what does that title represent, or what is the right set of candidates or individuals perhaps in my organization to reskill or mobilize, you want to be thinking at the skill level. And so, yes, today I am, or let's say my team is a series of folks that are, in essence, they're consultants that have HR domain expertise. They're deep experts there. But the title alone is not representative of their entire skill set. You need to actually think about what capabilities do they have to figure out whether or not they'd be a fit for a role. And I think that you want to kind of apply that methodology where skills are a consideration as it relates to selection of talent or to identification of talent. But as it relates to actually you determining size of gaps, I think it's still totally fine. And I would encourage organizations to think about that at the role level.
Yep. And then the only thing I would add to that is understanding the time gap in that planning, right? Is it an immediate need 3 to 6 months out versus more long-term? And if it's more immediate, do you acquire it or do you borrow it? Or do you have it if you understand your bench? And then if it's a long-term need, probably more, how do I train it within my organization? Might be a pathway that you would consider as a result of that. But I agree with Matt. It's not, your job titles are not going away per se, but this is a mechanism to better understand attributes around people and how do you leverage it more, and then have the employees feel like people are recognizing me for me, not necessarily my title, and allowing me to lean into what my strengths are and what I can contribute back to the organization.
Yeah, I think just one quick add to that is simply that you don't need to do this individually. Like, don't take this response from David and myself as, oh, okay, well then I need to know the skills. I think this is an opportunity for technology to play an important role, and whether that's validated skills or inferred skills, the aspect of skills, those atomic units that we were talking about earlier, they help to establish a common understanding of, if I say software developer, I may think of 10 skills that are different than your 10 skills. By thinking about, yes, software developer, but when I say software developer, I mean one that's great at Python and I don't care about R. Great. Okay. We can define that at the skill level, which provides the granularity to get better matching. And, that's going to make your recruiters better, your sourcers better. And ultimately the end product, or the individual that you're hiring, training, build, buy, borrow, is more appropriate for the role.
The next question is, one question that I have is, as organizations move more to skills-based hiring and subsequently how they comp these positions, what do you see as the shift of people shifting from being tied to a title to being more tied to being highly skilled with maybe a perceived lesser title?
It's a good question.
You want to start?
It depends. I mean, again, starting with what we were talking about just previously, titles aren't necessarily going away. But there's, if you recall the example of what I described earlier, we ran into a situation when, we're building out security practice, that the talent we needed, at least in the quantity that we needed it, and I'm going back a couple decades ago, didn't exist. And we just found that it was better, cheaper, faster, if you will, to bring in the right people with the right types of skill sets that had a propensity to want to know or learn about this type of field, and then train them up. And that can come from a lot of different walks of life. There's a lot of different types of stories around that, where there's these people that have probably nothing to do with technology whatsoever in their prior life or their career. And then they come in and they learn this, and they're all of a sudden experts in the security field. So for them, a title might be actually attractive because they're leaning into a field they want to know about, want to learn about, want to contribute to, et cetera. And then ultimately they stay longer. And then from a compensation perspective, you can tie this in potentially in a lot of different ways from, once they're actually there. For example, and I'm just drawing one, that compensation is a very complicated topic of how you put this all in terms of attraction as well. But once they're actually there, you can tie this to potentially performance metrics, their ability to learn and consume and want to grow as well in terms of bonuses and merit increases, et cetera, because you're going to actually see that and measure that within your organization as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I totally agree with your points, David. I think we are seeing, or at least I'm seeing a little bit more traction in terms of compensation related to specific niche skills, not kind of those fairly standard hard skills or soft skills, but when there's niche hard skills, hard to find, very important to an organization's success, is organizations starting to consider ways of comping. But I think that's more future state compensation model rather than something that I'm seeing at large. I think the way to think about this is compensation in relation not just to seniority of title, but also the scarcity versus scale of said skill available in external marketplace. So when you think about pharma, when you think about technology, there are going to be certain skill sets that are much harder to find, may not have as senior of a title, but you need to rationalize the competition for a smaller subset of talent. You could even think of like our video game designer example from earlier. And how do you think about going after this talent? Is it a compensation play? Is it a upskilling, reskilling play? So skills are coming into the fold in terms of compensation methodology and philosophy for organizations, but I don't think that purely skills-based, because you have these skills, you get a bump on your compensation. I don't think that we're ready for that. That's some sort of evolution to where we are today.
Great, thank you. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for the webinar today. Thank you, Matt and David, for that insightful presentation. And thanks everyone in the audience for taking the time out of your day to join us. This concludes today's webinar, and I also lastly want to thank our partner, Beamery. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.